I'll try and do a video showing some of the chainsaw sizes. When you look at the spec sheet, they all seem very different. People seem surprised by some of the use of the bigger saws in different situations. So I'm going to try and stick all with the same brand, and we'll try and compare a couple of different models. So I'll start with something that sizes that people are probably more familiar with. I'll try and explain why, from my point of view, there's really three different sizes or classes of saws, and why I'm comfortable using why I feel comfortable using some of the bigger ones. So we'll start off with these two. Grabbed a MS2 something. Hang on. So that's an MS230. As far as the physical size and case is concerned, an MS2 10 to 11. 230, 231, 250, 251. They're all the same case. It's just the piston and cylinder that changes. So physically they're the same dimensions. So that represents sort of that smaller size saw. They're obviously a class below this, but it's, from my point of view, 50cc and under is small, and then we move up. So to represent what I'd consider a mid-size saw is this 461. So these are 76-ish cc's, I believe. When we look at them side by side, there is a pretty noticeable difference. The 461's taller, it is longer, it is wider. When you pick them up, there is quite a noticeable difference between them. Between these two saws, you could make an argument for using this for different jobs compared to this. So that's why, in my mind, we've got the 50cc and below as a small size saw. Once you cross over that point, they all end up sort of in this mid size. So I'll swap out the 230 for something else, and we'll come back to this. Alright, so now we've swapped over. This is the MS310, still got the 461 next to it. So this is sort of what I'm saying. From that 211, 231, 251, that class of saws, by the time you get into this series, like your 290s, 310s, 311s obviously, 390s, 391s, you really have changed. You've come up a size. In overall dimensions, and the weight really is quite comparable. When you're using them, they feel very similar. So I'd class anything from that range as a mid-size saw. So they're similar lengths, they're similar heights, they're similar widths. On the spec sheet, there's obviously difference between weights, but when you're using them physically, they feel very, very similar. So even when you lay them down on their sides, dimensionally, they're pretty similar. When you pick them up, move them around, do whatever you're going to do with them, they're very similar. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is these use the same bar mount. So whatever you can run on this, you can run on this. So that's sort of the important step. So I'll drop the 310 and we'll go to something different again. Okay, so we've still got our 461 on the right. We've got a 660 on the left. This is where my opinions may differ. Most people seem to consider the 660 as a large saw. The reality is, when they're in front of you and you're using them, they feel very similar. There's not that much of a noticeable difference as far as weight and handling goes between them. And again, just like with the 310 I had up here before, they're the same bar mounts. So a lot of people will say the 660's a big saw, it's a heavy saw, whatever. And that's fair enough. If you're coming from smaller saws, they do seem a bit daunting. But just remember, whatever bar and chain you run on your 290 or 270, 290s, all that smaller series, your 461s, all of that, your 500s, whatever, you can run that same bar and chain combo on one of these. There is no reason why you can't set this up with a 16 or an 18 inch bar if you like. Dimensionally wise, it's a little bit longer, a little bit wider, a little tiny bit taller. But all in all, there's not that much. There's not actually that much in this. The other thing that people get caught up on is the weight of the saws. On the spec sheet, there is quite a big difference between these. I can't remember the quoted numbers, but it makes this look bad. When it's actually with you and you're picking it up, you're moving it around. So that's a 461. It feels okay. It's got no bar and chain, sort of what I'd expect. This isn't really that much different. Yeah, okay, it might be heavier, but it's not really that big a deal breaker. You pick it up, you handle it around, you can still maneuver it in whatever way you need to. It feels very similar to something like this. It's not a huge difference. So I classify these as a mid-size saw. I'll go to something to show you what a large saw is. I'll keep the 461 here. Alright, so now we're into the large saw category. There is not many of these left anymore. If we look at the 880 compared to the 460, it is a massive difference. In length, in width, in height, everything dimensionally is very, very big on something like this. It feels very heavy. You know you are carrying this thing around. Even from the point of view of your hand spacing from the front and rear handles, it feels very different. So that makes the handling very different as well. They're still manageable. They are heavy, but you do develop techniques for moving them around. So yeah, there is a lot of techniques that you learn over time to make one of these a bit more manageable, but it's hard to get away from the sheer physical size and weight. You also got things like the amount of fuel it uses, the weight once it's full of fuel and bar oil is pretty significant. So we'll swap the 461 out and I'll bring the 660 back. Alright, so we're back with the 880, the 660. These things are really hard to class as the same size. It's hard to say they're both large saw because there's so much difference between them. Swapping from using that to this, there is a massive difference. Either way you go, you'll notice a huge difference. A much bigger difference than going from like a 310 to something like this in terms of weight handling, how you maneuver it, how it works. It really is hard to put into perspective just how enormous these things are. It is a very, very significant difference in size. From the size of the side covers, everything is just really massive on something like this. They're sort of in a class of their own. These are 3120s, things like 070s, 090s, the big 120cc Echoes. They really stand out as their own sort of thing. They're not capable of being adapted for the same kind of role as something like this. These are much more universal. So yeah, there's a pretty good case to be made for using one of these for most jobs. These things are much, much more specialised. They also take different bar mounts, and the bars on them are a bit different to the regular 3003 mount and the mid mounts that you run on these, and everything from a 261 to one of these. The bars generally are heavier in every aspect due to the increased width down at the tail, at the mount end. They generally have larger diameter noses. They have a wider belly the whole way down the bar. So everything about these things is sort of made for that maximum durability. There's not really much care given for weight once you're into this size. These things, you can run those short laminate bars that you can run on everything else. You can keep the weight down to a reasonable level. Nothing says you have to run one of these with a 36-inch bar. You can run it with whatever you like. They're pretty manageable moving them around for small work. It's not too bad. Much better than people give them credit for. So yeah, that's some of the basics. That's how I describe saws. Like I said, anything 50cc and below is small saw sort of range. once you get that 50 to 90 range, they become mid-size, and there's obviously a significant increase once you go to these 120cc saws. It's very noticeable. It's not realistic to run one of these things for everyday use. I'm reasonably confident I could run one of these for everything. It'd just be a matter of setting it up for different jobs. But yeah, I thought I'd give some perspective because I've got them. Why not? If you just go to your dealer and you see them on the shelf and they're set up, you know, they'll have one of these with a 36, 42 inch bar, something like that, and you pick it up. They seem really big and unwieldy. Once you've set them up as you'd actually run them, they're not too bad, but huge step up from something like this as far as just dealing with the weight, and the handling wise of them is completely different. These things, when set up with short bars, it's not a massive difference between running even things like 361s, 462s, 500s, things like that. It's not that big a change to get up into this size. What you mostly gain from running them these days is torque. So they will tolerate being laboured a fair bit more. You can deal with that one or two ways, or you can use that in a couple of different ways. You can either run longer bars on them, or you can run more aggressive chains on shorter bars and actually apply more force. It really depends on what you're cutting. If you're in softer woods that are quick cutting, then who cares? You get into hard, dry stuff, these things with a reasonably short bar and use the torque, it's the fastest way of getting through it. But yeah, that's the difference between them. It's very noticeable once you get to here. These things down to that sort of 60cc size, yeah, it's not that big a difference.